Alright, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Unit 5, Genetics. This is where we're going to look at DNA and how this macromolecule, this nucleic acid, how this thing that lives inside the nucleus of your cells translates to physical appearance or characteristics or even disease. How about characteristics like being way taller than average, which we see pictured here in the bottom right, or a disorder known as albinism, where you lack any pigmentation and are completely white or pale. Or genetic abnormalities where you are in fact your own sister, like this cat pictured in the top right. Genetics is the study of heredity and the variations of inherited characteristics. So remember, DNA has variations to it. Mutations occur within DNA. Now, we don't exactly know what heredity means just yet, but we're going to define it a little later on. All right, so hold up your thumb right now. Do you have the hitchhiker's thumb pictured in the bottom right? Right? This is a genetic abnormality, a mutation. I do not have it, clearly. But some people do. And it doesn't really cause any issues for the species or the organism, so it hasn't been phased out of the population. But we see disorders like this individual in the top right who is only 14 years old but appears to be 80 or 90 because of several genetic mutations. And corn, well, as we're going to find out, corn is actually one of the most genetically manipulated species on Earth. Now let's talk about DNA first, right? Where all these changes actually happen that manifest in these physical forms that we can see. So we know that chromosomes are contained inside what organelle in the cell? Yeah, the nucleus. And we know that chromosomes are made of DNA, right? Chromosomes are bundles of proteins and DNA all mixed together. But what is a gene? Right? You've heard me say this word before. A gene is a segment of DNA that controls a hereditary trait. Hereditary trait meaning something that can be passed from parent to offspring. So this is what a gene is. So you have, like, for example, the gene for dark skin, the gene for long legs, the gene for eye color. These are all genes that can be inherited from your parents. And a chromosome, you can think of a chromosome as basically just a long chain of genes, right? It's kind of what DNA is, right? DNA makes up chromosomes, and if you think of DNA as a long chain of genes, then you just have to think of chromosomes as a long chain of genes. Now, there are things called alleles. Alleles are the alternative forms of genes that arise as a result of a mutation and are at the same position in the chromosome. So what I mean by that is, if we look at this picture in the bottom left, let's look at these highlighted homologous chromosomes, okay? If this left one is from mom and this right one is from dad, they are the same chromosome, meaning they have all the same genes in the same locations, but one comes from one parent and one comes from the other, but they're both inside of your cells, right? Because that's where you get your DNA from, your parents. Now, on mom's, on the left, she might have the gene right here for brown eyes. And on dad's, on the right, he might have the same gene for eye color in the same position, but his gene may be mutated and be for blue eyes. Now, because these are both eye color genes in the same location on the same chromosomes, we call them alleles. Alleles are just alternative forms of genes, right? Variations between genes. The same genes. Let's talk about traits, right? Traits is a word that you're all probably much more familiar with, but don't exactly know what it means. So a trait is the characteristic that an organism has, like hair color, eye color, tall, short, skin color. These are traits, things you can outwardly express, and there's a more complicated term for it that we're going to learn a little down the road. Now, two alleles, right, two gene versions, must be present in order for a trait to show up in the offspring. And you guessed it, you get one of these alleles from mom and the other comes from dad. When sperm meets egg and fertilization occurs, the new offspring then has 2 alleles for every trait. Now this is where a concept of dominance and recessiveness shows up, because you're not going to express most times both alleles, right? We're not going to see physically both of these alleles present within your DNA, both of these gene variations you have. One is going to show up over the other for some reason. Most cases. Now that we're a little bit familiar with genes and how they relate to chromosomes and DNA, and this concept of alleles or variations of genes, let's talk about the father of modern day genetics, Gregor Mendel. He was an Austrian monk and he was born in 1822, many moons ago. He is known as the father of modern genetics because he discovered the 3 fundamental laws of genetics. And to be fair, he discovered them all by accident. Now, these laws of genetics, they would forever change biology. And he would figure these laws out as he conducted a series of experiments in a garden in the monastery that he lived in. And it would take him roughly 14 years. So here are the laws that Gregor Mendel discovered. He discovered the law of dominance and recessiveness. This means that, like we talked about a few slides ago, one allele can be dominant over another. So brown eyes can be dominant over blue eyes. And if you have both of those alleles, you're going to have brown eyes physically rather than blue eyes because of brown eye dominance. The principle of segregation. This has to do with mitosis and meiosis and how chromosomes move around during cell division. And lastly, another principle that does also have to do with cell division is the principle of independent assortment. How does one gene, one allele, affect another gene or another allele when cells divide? So I hope you're already seeing we're talking about Unit 2 here with the macromolecule nucleic acids, aka DNA, and we're going to talk about Unit 4 in this unit because cell division matters when we talk about genetics. But Mendel's greatest contribution for us was that he demonstrated that inherited characteristics are carried by genes. And I want you to keep in mind he did all of this in a garden. He had no ability to observe DNA straight on because he did not have the technology. And he actually didn't even know what DNA was because science didn't know what DNA was just yet. But he was still able to discover that there were these inheritable characteristics that could be passed from one generation to the next. And Mendel would call them units or factors instead of genes because we weren't sure what to call them back then. See you folks in the next one.